we're just two people who really like long form podcasts. Maybe that's not a thing a lot of people like, but I feel like a lot of people in my circles are very much in that category.
Welcome to the Digital Ministry Podcast, the Digital Ministry Podcast, not to be confused with Digital Ministry Podcast, which is out there too, but they've all been, vacant, or what's the word? Silent.
Yeah.
They've been silent since like 2012. But here we are in 2024, because this is going to get released.
Oh, gosh. Because of all the backlog.
Yeah. And 2024 podcast is like making a resurgence. And I'm excited to have as a guest today, Adam Silverness, who is with Young Life, and in a rare in-studio interview live from our studio in Bozeman, Montana, the bustling metropolis of Bozeman, Montana. What are we up to now? 100,000 people?
I think in the Valley, maybe 100,000 or 80 or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot more than when we started living here.
Big time.
Yeah.
So Adam and I go way back. Adam Silverness leads Young Life here in the Gallatin Valley, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Bozeman is super interesting to me. So for our listeners that might not be familiar with it, this is a terrible introduction for you. So I apologize. I'm not giving you your full due.
You're not really teeing me up, but
I know.
I'm excited for what you're going to say here.
So this is like a microcosm. So we talk about digital ministry on global scale. So we've talked to Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. We've talked to Global Media Outreach, which is, a team that I used to work with, reaching people all over the world, million people a day kind of scale. Bozeman is geographically located in a valley, which kind of like contains us. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to digital media and social media, it's, you can target this area and have a very real connection between the people in your community that you're trying to reach, through Young Life.
Yep.
And like your social media presence.
Right.
So I'm really excited for this conversation today because Adam, you and I have been talking for a while about how do we use digital tools to advance like a local ministry,
yep,
but then really build a scalable model that could be rolled out to Young Life, like on a national or global scale.
Yeah.
And so I think even though we're in, obscure middle of nowhere, Montana, what the work that you're doing has potential to really create a model that could be replicated in all kinds of different organizations and ministries around the world.
Yeah.
So no pressure.
No, and I won't burden myself with all of that either. But no, I think you're exactly right, because I think that, and I think there are probably lots of places where it's true that there's a little microcosm and you could see if something works and you could move it out. But I think the bigger thing that you hit on was it is different than some sort of evangelistic organization or some huge church or something like that, that their hope is to have a national or global reach from that platform, and which is fine. I think that's a totally fine thing to do. But when we're looking at something like Young Life, which is a local ministry, even though it's an international organization, it's a local ministry. And, here who I care most about are middle school and high school students in Bozeman. I don't really want, nor do I think it would be that effective for Young Life in Nebraska or something like that to be able to reach kids in the same way, certainly that we have the potential to here. Definitely physically, but in kind of an online presence in a digital way. It's been really fun to try and figure out and try some things and see who's doing some things. And there's some fun things just within Young Life and some other Young Life areas that we've been kind of grabbing onto and trying to see. And I just feel like this is something the Lord's been kind of putting on my heart to try and figure out a little bit. And it hasn't been honestly all that different than what we already do. It's just what does some of those similar principles that we kind of carry with us within Young Life specifically, how do those translate to Instagram, for instance? And it's been fun to mess around with a little bit.
So my background, if somebody's listening to this, either dropping into this episode or not that I expect this to happen, but that one loyal listener out there who's now on episode 5, and they're like, "Oh, Nick's never really talked about himself."
Hi, Mom.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't really talked about like my own experience, but for this conversation, I will. I've worked on global scales. At one point, I led a team that owned 98% of Google's mobile ad inventory in the continent of Africa. And we were using all of that to introduce people to Jesus and bring them into meaningful conversations. And so in that context, I was always talking about like, how do we go more local, like even hyper local? Like, how do you really connect a person to a person wherever it is that they live? You can use these digital tools to reach anybody anywhere.
Yep.
But I think your Nebraska example was kind of making this point. Like for somebody in Lincoln, Nebraska, to reach anybody anywhere isn't really effective or, a good use of tools or time. What we really want to do is connect kids to those leaders that are in their local community that can. And so like the work that you're doing digitally, I think is so interesting to me personally, because I've dealt on like the large scale and always trying to drive to local. And now you've got a strong kind of local person, like face-to-face community that you're trying to really amplify digitally in order to make more kids aware of the opportunity of, hey, there's these people that are gathering and we'd love to have you come and attend.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's on the one side is it's sort of very front end evangelism in that kind of way. And then on the other hand, it's community building, right? So it's like trying to figure out these two pieces that we can use tools that are already in place. And for us at the moment, we're kind of honing into focusing on Instagram because it's easy to understand. It's accessible for an old guy like me, but kids are still using it. I mean, there's lots of other tools that kids are using, but I know that there had been talk, and there's probably always some talk in places of trying to like, oh, we should make our own thing. But to me, using tools that already exist makes a lot more sense. But being able to try and do sort of both of those things, and with our with Young Life having 75 or 80 years of kind of in-person history and a lot of trial and error and different things, and kind of having a model that has worked for a long time, just trying to all of a sudden have a Young Life Instagram ministry didn't make as much sense of like, how can we use this tool to do the same work that we're doing, knowing that, one of a core tenet of Young Life is going where kids are at. And so if we aren't going, if we're able to go to the mall, or we're going to the school, or we're going to a football game or the skate park or wherever, because that's where kids are, why would we stop and not go where kids are on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or YouTube or any of those kind of places? So, and the statistics kind of bear that out, where kind of classic Young Life would go to, oh, we're going after, whatever jocks or something like that. And which is a big portion of like a high school population, and somewhere between 40 and 50% of students participate in school sports, which is a high number. But then you take that and compare that to how many kids use YouTube every day. It's like 99.5%. I mean, it's a crazy amount, and or Instagram or whatever. And so just even use of time might make more sense. And kids aren't as apt to just jump right in and go to a Young Life club anymore like they used to. They want to know what's going on. They want to see who's there.
Try before you buy.
Totally. And they want to lurk a little bit. And so, yeah.
So I think that's, people that might be listening to this and like, oh, well, I'm not involved with Young Life or it's not youth. I think there's a lot of stuff that transfers.
No
here.
question.
I think adults are hesitant to just show up to church, for example. They want to kind of see what's happening before they go.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of kind of misunderstanding about like what that experience would be or what it looks like.
Yeah.
Maybe it comes from stereotypes. Maybe it comes from, misinformation. And maybe sometimes it's true. Maybe sometimes it's like, I have a friend that was like, I'm not going to go to church. Well, why not? He's like, I don't want to go like stand up and sing with a bunch of other people. Like it's weird.
Yeah. And you can't go, well, no, we don't do that.
Right.
Like, no, we do. Every church does that.
Right.
That's a part of it.
So how much of your, strategy is kind of helping people understand what to expect? Let me back up for a second. What's the goal? Is the primary goal to reach kids through social media and have them show up in person?
It would be relationships. I think would be our hope to utilize social media in that way where.
So not necessarily like filling butts and seats in a club. Not necessarily,
although that could happen. But even some of the metrics that we use just generally here locally where, we want to make sure that we're doing a really good job with our own personal spiritual lives for our volunteers and our staff and all of that stuff. We want to make sure that we're with kids, we're going to kids. We call it contact work, but just being around people, to translate it to something else. And how many names do we know that we're praying for? And so when we look at something like Instagram, trying to translate that similarly, it's like, well, yeah, it'd be great for them to come on a Monday night. That'd be really fun. And, but our real hope is that they get a relationship with a adult Young Life leader. That's the hope is that. And because even if they never came to our Monday night thing, if they were able to go have coffee or lunch or even have, I don't think it would be our ideal, but have a whole relationship just on over DMs or something like that, or maybe it turns into some FaceTime thing or whatever. I think we would call that a success, in that same way. Knowing that if we're moving in that direction, there will be butts and seats. That's going to happen.
Sure.
And because, hey, we're building relationships with you. I want you to come with me to this thing. That's how we do it generally anyways. Like if we're going to go to a football game and invite kids to come to the club, like they're coming because they know me or one of our other leaders. They're not probably just going to come and they heard about it. Somebody invited them. And so we want to offer that to kind of our audience, and I'll try to make it maybe a little bit more general and applicable. So like to whoever is following us, we want them to have the ability to see what's actually happening and going on. Not some idealized version of it, not pictures of and videos of kids in San Jose where their Young Life has, 1,000 kids coming to it or whatever. I don't think that's true, but what's actually going on, so that if a kid were to walk in on a Monday night, they already kind of know what's happening. And because it's local, because I like that hyper local. They know what kids are there. They know who's coming. And especially if we're doing a good job at not just showing that, but having kids be even sometimes the ones that are like, we're grabbing pictures and videos from them to post and that side of things is really big. I think the community building side of it is maybe a little bit more obvious where, people want to see that. Even this weekend, a sermon at our church was talking about, kind of disparagingly of social media, which I totally understand just because it's easy to maybe push an identity that you want the world to see. And, but some statistics were brought up of the high number of 8 to 15-year-olds that want to be YouTube stars and 15 to 30-year-olds be influencers. And that might be a bad thing in some ways, but it does speak to our innate desires that we have from the Lord to be known, to be wanted, to know. And to me, those statistics are less about like, oh my gosh, how bad is social media, and more about like there's still holes that need to be filled that we know only God can fill. And so how are we going to then enter into these same kind of places where kids already are and or adults or whoever already are, and we can build relationships with them, show them what actual Christian life might be like for them. I mean, it's a pretty unique opportunity that I think a lot of places haven't had, because like your friend, like, before, like he knew that it was all about singing, probably because he went at some point and it was singing.
Sure.
He had to enter in, and that's a big step, especially like post-COVID. Like that's a big step to just walk into somewhere, not knowing anybody and not knowing what's going to happen or go on. But if you've got some picture of what's going to be there, who's going to be there, how the night might go or the morning might go, or whatever it is, whatever you're trying to do, there's a couple hurdles that have already been jumped. So, yeah.
So what are you seeing? And I've got it up on my phone. Is this the right?
Yeah.
So Bozeman Young Life on Instagram. You've got 543 followers.
Yep.
Just so you know, that's 0.5% of the Bozeman population.
It's great.
But that's total population. I wonder how many kids live in the valley.
Totally. Because I think because we want to be hyper local, I only care about Bozeman high school kids that follow us there. Yeah. So it's Bozeman and Gallatin High, and
this kid's on here way too much.
He is on there way too much. It was a very funny night. And I bet this is a great podcast content. Us looking at your phone. Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah. Everybody can participate in this.
But I care.
Well, I did call that out, by the way, so people can look at it on their own.
Totally.
Phones.
Yeah. But honestly, I mean, my goal is not followers from, the dozens and dozens of people that are listening to this right now. And, like that's not the hope. The hope is the right kids following. I mean, because it's the same thing with our in-person ministry. And we're really trying to blend those, so there's not really that language anymore, kind of in-person or digital. But
we should talk about that.
But for the sake of this right now, like our in-person is, like we always talk about the right kids, and like our mission is to reach out to kids who are far from Jesus. So like that's our niche in our ministry, and we know that, and we're confident about that. Anybody can come. We want to help also kids grow in their faith. But if we're going to choose kids, if I get to choose a Christian kid or a kid who's never been to church, I'm going to choose that kid every time, even if it's at the expense of that other kid, hoping that God's got that kid and his family does, or the church does, or whatever. And so when I talk about the right kids, we spend time actually defining that, because we want to be all things to all people, but that's just not realistic, especially when you only have a limited amount of time, like in a digital context, to communicate that. Yeah. And so having the right kids, Belgrade, which is a town right next to us, they've got their own high school, but the culture is different. The kids are different. Everything is different. There might be some Belgrade kids that follow us on there, and that's okay. I mean, it's not a huge deal, but I'm not going to actively be trying to engage with those kids. Like I'm going to be really, really narrow, because if we want to reach into Belgrade kids, we're going to start another account, and we'll, in another club, and we're going to be that local, and have it not make as much sense to follow that.
So from a marketing point of view, what you're talking about is an ideal customer profile.
Yes.
Or in ministry, we might call it like your target persona.
Mm-hmm.
Persona is a semi-fictional representation of the person that you're trying to meet. And it's not demographics. Yep. It's like very specific. Demographics are like, males aged 18 to 25. It's not like that. It's very specific. And I think that a lot of people can understand what you're saying about, you referenced Belgrade and Bozeman. Anybody, certainly in the US, familiar with high school sports.
Right.
It's like that high school is different than this high school. Same town, same people, same, culture.
Yep.
Very different approach. And then even from outside of the U.S., anybody that's ever, watched a football game understands,
Right.
like the Premier League, you've got different teams and affiliations. So even though everybody's, in the UK, it's, you can be hyper local, really specific. So you're really leaning into that with your team to understand, what are like the hopes, dreams, motivations, what resonates, what's a turn off.
Yep.
How do you help bring your team along in that line of thinking? Because you're not the only one posting and running stuff on.
No, and actually, I'm really anymore. I'm not really posting anything on that one because I'm not as close to Bozeman high school kids as Jared is. And so in his team, he's the full-time high school staff guy that we have here, and so he knows, right? And so I'm communicating to him. I mean, a little bit more theory, in a way,
sure,
and so I'm trying to communicate to him, and then Brooke, who does some of our middle school ministry, communicating to her, that's a whole, kind of a whole different animal for us. I mean, some bigger challenges with middle schoolers, but being able to share with them just some of the things that we're talking about. But for them, none of this is all that, weird or new, because we're talking about the same thing. In general, we're just going, how does this stuff we already do, how does it apply to this? Like, say this is a new
how does it apply on social?
Yeah, like how is this just a new hangout place for kids? And with some big advantages in some ways and some other disadvantages in some other ways. And it's a very crowded space in a lot of ways. So how can you make it less crowded? How can we find who who are our people, and and then as far as our team goes, when we move maybe down to the volunteer level, a lot of that is just helping them understand, at the moment anyways, helping them understand even just some of the importance of, hey, take pictures. And I mean, don't be weird about it, but
sure.
But good luck being weird. I mean, with us, with high school kids, and it'll be obviously different with different demographics of people, but for us, like, that's not a problem. Every high school kid wants to be in a picture or video.
Right.
And so for us to do that, and then we can compile those things and post those things. And then what's great about it is you can tell how you're doing. I mean, not that we want to live our life by
instant feedback. Isn't it?
Yeah. And not that we want to live our life by that, because that can probably become dangerous and not something that we want to, because we don't want to produce Instagram stars. We don't necessarily want to be like big global influencers. And so keeping that like hyper local kind of idea in mind, but we can see like, oh man, like a bunch of high school kids shared this picture or video. That's crazy.
So give me an example. What's one that worked well?
I would say we put together this little reel of just a couple little sections of video that we took from the evening. It was not professionally done in the slightest. It wasn't from a good angle. The lighting wasn't great. The sound wasn't great. Nothing was, but kids were in it. And so for us, we put that up there, and we posted on our normal. I mean, to get a little nitty gritty, post it on as kind of a normal post, and then share it to your own reel. And then on some of our other accounts, and some of our leaders just ended up sharing it also. And not that we're asking them to do that, we know that can be kind of a weird space sometimes, but they'll naturally do it often.
You can kind of oversubscribe that too if you're asking people to do it all the time.
Yes, no question. And, and I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out Instagram's algorithm. Like, to me, at the moment, it's kind of a waste of time, because I don't.
Wait, say that again. Let me turn the volume up.
Like, I'm not like that. That just seems like a waste of time to try and figure out, especially when it changes so often. And so if I'm really comfortable and confident in what we're doing, like, I'm just hopeful that it will translate and work. I know that stuff's being seen, and we know that we're going to put stuff on our story because our story is going to be seen way more than anything else, because that's just at the moment what everybody's looking at.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do that. And then I think when you get kids that you are hanging around and are in a picture or a video, when they share something, I don't know what that would be like in real life, but it seems like we should count that as a win.
How big of a step is that? Like in a high school context for a kid to publicly say, hey, like I'm associated.
Definitely depends on the kid, right? I mean, and so, but for the most part, if they're giving you sort of like they're going, I'm associated with this. This is something that I'm about. I'm going to put it, even if it's just posting on a story that goes away in 24 hours or whatever. Everybody they follow, just because of how everything, like they're all going to see that.
Right.
And so being able to do that, again, we don't spend so much time in going like, we need to make sure that this looks amazing. We want it to look good enough.
Sure.
And so we can see faces or, whatever. And so kids can go, oh, that's me, because that feels good. And then other kids can go, oh, I know them.
Yeah.
And I would fit in there, or I can ask them when I'm at school or whatever. But I would count that as a pretty big win, generally speaking, if a kid's willing to give us some of their space and go, hey, yeah, I mean, it would maybe be akin to kids starting to just go like wear a Young Life shirt or something in the high school, or maybe even a little further than that. I'm not really sure. I haven't given a ton of thought other than just to go like, that feels like it's a good thing to.
No, I think it is. And actually I was, I mentioned earlier 0.5% of the population, but we've got 2 high schools in town. They're both about 2,500, just to make the math easy.
Yep.
So you're talking about 5,000 high school kids, 543 followers. Are the majority of those kids? Yeah.
Because we try and make it that.
Yeah. So
because we
10%.
we've gone through and kind of culled some of that stuff too. So
you kicked me out twice, but I keep coming back.
Yeah, because you don't need to see that. You don't need to see what's going on. But yeah, and we want to. I think another kind of fun metric that I'm not sure how much it really means, but it seems like it means a lot, is like when we follow a kid, because we'll take time to like some of our key kids, that are there and invested and involved. Where before, to get to know their friends, I'm going to lunch and sitting down at a lunch table, and I mean, it was fine, awkward, but that was all right. But good luck getting some of our leaders now to do some of that stuff. Some of them will, but now I can see who's friend, like who they're friends with, and I can go in and follow them. And that's not faux pas. That's not like weird for anybody to just go follow anybody.
Sure.
But that doesn't really mean anything. And maybe it does to the kid. Oh, that's whatever. Bozeman Young Life. But when then they decide to follow back.
Yeah.
Generally what that means is they've gone in and gone, what is this thing?
Yeah. Who is this?
And they're going to look at stuff, which also means, we can't just be throwing random dumb things up on our page and on our grid view or whatever. Like, it needs to look at least okay. It needs to be like we now know, and again,
credible. It's like social credit.
Totally. And so we need to make sure we're not going to have a bunch of infographics on there anymore. We used to do that. We're not going to anymore. And again, this is maybe digging into the weeds, but like,
you're telling me high school kids don't like charts and graphs in their Instagram feed?
And here's I do this training, and it's a part of it. And I got this from somebody else. It's not just from me, but because I think statistically it probably bears out somewhere, and now it's just an anecdotal thing for me. But for me or you, generally speaking, and it might be different specifically, but we're using social media, a lot of it for information. Where is this thing? Especially with Young Life, if we take that, or a church or something, I might be looking at that and going, well, I'm going to see, when church service is or when Young Life starts, what the theme is.
Right.
That's how my mind works. And then I'm looking at it for entertainment, right? I'm just laughing at cat videos or whatever it is, just like scrolling. And the last thing is relationships. And I'm not saying this to everybody, you might be different, but that's me. And I think that's probably true I'm 38. And as you go up, that's probably, maybe more and more true the older that you get. The kids that we're trying to reach, we know it's almost opposite. It's relationships first and information is last. So like they're not going,
and entertainment's in the middle.
Yeah. It's not like the only thing that they're doing is scrolling through to see when Young Life is. They just happen upon, Young Life. And so, well, man, when somebody goes to our bio, like our main page on Instagram, it better reflect what kids actually want to see and what's actually going on. So if it's just a grid view of the last 100 clubs and pajama club and ugly sweater club and this or that, that's not why they're there. If it's full of a bunch of pictures of what's actually happening, kids that they know having a good time, they're way more apt to follow us and follow us back and then if we can continue to do, and then there's a couple things that we could probably do to then even make that impact even better. But I feel like we're then well on our way to something that is actually going to work, because we know who our audience is. It's very, very clear who our audience is. It's not just anyone. It's really, really clear. And so we're able to really, really, hopefully effectively dig in and dive into, like, I mean, just like we're not going to do a dumb Young Life t-shirt. Like, that makes a difference because I want kids to wear it. So we're not going to do something just dumb so they don't and hand it out and go, wear this to school. And they're going to I would never wear this to school.
Right.
But we're okay spending time on that. I think for some, it starts to feel weird when you start to go, oh yeah, but I don't want to like get real nitty gritty into the, like, like trying so hard to try and get people. It's like, well, if you know who you're trying to get and how you're trying to do that, like, then it's worth digging in a little bit and seeing what actually works.
Well, I think what I hear you saying is more of a, like, it's valuable. The interaction is valuable. So you're delivering value in a way that's not off-putting, and it's also invitational, but it's also valuable to the kid because you're recognizing like what they want and need, so your relationship first comment, I think, is really insightful.
Yeah.
And you're going to get greater engagement. Engagement and followers and all that stuff is a byproduct of social media done well.
Totally.
And so often we try to flip it around and like game the system. How can I hack this? How can I get more?
Well, and you told me this was a bunch of months ago, and we were talking about this. Like, that's not hard, right? Like, that's
hacking it.
Yeah. It's not hard to just have a large audience, or what would look like a large audience, and to have a lot of people follow you. I mean, there are ways that you can do that easy, especially if you have money. I think, like, there are just ways to do that. But I think, and that may be fine in some business context or something. But when we're looking at like actually making a kingdom impact on our communities, like, I don't want to waste my time. I want to know who I'm trying to reach. I mean, all the same things that we are totally fine with spending hours and hours and hours figuring out in person, with, if it's a church or if it's another ministry or something, like, we'll sit down and strategize all day about that. But some of my conversations, and I'm sure you've had the same, and I'm sure all of our listeners have had similar conversations too, of people that go, I'm just like, I'd rather there just not be any social media. Like, I'd rather that just go away. Like, the downsides are worse than the upsides. It's a dark place with dark people that are doing dark things, which some of those things are true. Sure. I mean, sure. That's like, but then to just go, well, as a Christian, I'm not going to go there.
Right.
Like, well, not everybody's called to everywhere, but a bunch of us are probably being called into that place. So how do we do that?
I hear you saying, like, isn't that where we should be?
It's exactly where we should be.
Yeah.
And exactly. Especially if your audience is people who are far from the Lord, which should be
right.
Most people's audience.
The social media is about relationship, is very insightful. My kids don't have social media.
Mine either.
Except for one, but my kids are older than yours.
Yeah.
Except for one who just got Snapchat.
Oh, really?
And what it can, and so, have you read Tech Wise Family, Andy Couch?
Uh-huh.
It's a great book. and maybe I should get him on here. That would be
Andy Crouch.
Yeah, that would be a good.
Can I
interview.
co-host that?
Yeah, let's do it.
That'd be great.
Fun.
Okay.
We're coming for you, Andy. I talked to him.
Sure, you're listening. You're out there.
I talked to him years and years ago. Anyway, that's I love his approach to this. Deb, my wife and I kind of came to this point where it's like, okay, I've got a high school junior that's just, I mean, he's on me. Like, come on, everybody's on here. And I never buy into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had other parents kind of congratulate me for holding a hard line,
totally.
Which I took as kind of a badge of honor, probably wrongly. Okay, so what am I trying to say? What it really came down to is like, I want my kids to, okay, they're going to have that. They're going to experience it at some point. I'd rather have them do that while they're in my house rather than, graduate into college and have to wrestle with what do I do now? I've got like tech overload, right. Where I'm not there to influence it. So we cracked that open, and very shortly after, we have this rule in our family, like your phone is not yours, it's mine. Mm-hmm. It's on loan. So I've got, an agreement with my kids where if I know your passwords, if I ask for it, you gotta give it to me. And they've been really great about that. And they should be proud of themselves. I think they're managing that stuff well. But the other day I was doing one of those checks, and like in the time it took me to walk to the kitchen table, that thing was like 20 messages coming in, and it was all nonsense kind of stuff. I mean, from my, just kids checking in. How do you deal with that? How do you see that? What's the implication of that type of environment on like the Young Life social media channel? Because it's brand new to me. So sorry for the long setup here, but like, I think maybe some of our listeners might be in a similar boat, which is why I've taken time to walk through this. But like, it was a shock and a surprise to me as somebody who's worked in not only digital ministry, but I've worked with these social media companies for over a decade. Yeah. And I've read all the stats, and then to see my kid's phone just like
totally, it's different.
20 messages a second. Mm-hmm. How do you even manage that? Yeah.
Well, and I think a bunch of things go through my mind because there's some of because we're the same with our kids, but our kids are younger, 10 and 14. And our freshman has a phone, but no social media. And just because I've read some of the statistics, and for her, the downside is so high, even if the percentage of the downside isn't very high, but the downside is, like very, very detrimental. And so right now that's kind of where we're at. We said we can always talk about it. It's always an open conversation. But for a long time, I was sort of I pushed pretty hard against us really having any real presence ministry-wise in this space, especially with kids, because I didn't want to be a part of the problem.
Yeah.
Not even that I didn't
contribute.
Didn't want to seem like it. I just genuinely didn't want to be a part of the issue that I know exists. But the more that you interact with kids, it's for you and me, we have like our real life and our digital life. Like, and even though we try and maybe make those things look similar, if we're doing a good job, they're still in our minds, at least mine. It's different. It's separate. And for kids though, kind of these digital natives, there isn't any separation. There's not, it's just my life. And my life is all of my relationships at school and on Snapchat and like the videos that I watch of my favorite contributors that live in LA and and all around the world. And there's some things you're like, oh, that's so awesome and really cool. But then there's some things too where you're like, how can a junior in high school handle, 1,000 Snapchat messages a day? Like, well, the answer is that he probably can't. Like, we're not built for that.
Right.
And so a little bit of a long setup also to go, but we know though, and especially because we know who our audience is, we know almost our entire audience is one of those kids, and they are on this constantly because it's a part of their life that they don't see as different than a part of their real life, that maybe we would say that kind of this physical life. It's all the same. And so if we aren't there,
you're not part of the real
we're
life.
not part of it. We're not a part of their life in that way. Along with a bunch of the advantages that we already talked about of, sort of having, like 24-hour access to the schools that are really pushing hard against us right now to go like, we don't know if we want you to have a similar relationship with the school that you used to, where we could just go, we're just.
They used to let you show up for lunch.
Yeah.
Or
kind of whenever. And
chaperone the dance.
Yep.
And all that stuff.
And still some of that is true here, but other places it's not.
Right.
And so, but instead to see it as like, is God making another way for us to interact with kids? Is, are we going to take that? Are we going to do it well? Are we going to, make it this thing? I mean, I think in the Christian world on a big scale, there are some big examples of, big pastors failing pretty spectacularly as they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we obviously don't want to be a part of that. And so, well, if you make it really hyper local, like sure, you might walk into a coffee shop and people know who you are. That's a little bit different than trying to, be this unrealistic person to, a bunch of other people. So, but I don't think our hope is to take kids off of social media. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But our hope is to know that kids are there and be the same kind of light that we are when we walk into a lunchroom or whatever, and try and not just be a positive influence, because there's a lot of positive things on there, but like how are we bringing the kingdom of God into a space like that?
How are you fostering relationships?
Mm-hmm.
I love that you went there right at the beginning. So you've done a little bit of training on this with other Young Life areas.
Yep.
Give me like the top 3 things that you highlight when you do those trainings. What do you want people to think about?
One is, and I've said it a bunch, this isn't anything different than what we're doing. We're not changing what we're doing. We're not changing the type of kid that we're moving toward, anything like that. And I think keeping that in mind, like we might call it, for Young Life, the sort of insider language is contact work, like an adult, a Christian adult moving toward like into the world of kids. Like we're still doing that, and even calling it like digital contact work makes it seem like a whole different thing, but it really isn't. So
you reject that digital label?
Well, I just don't know if it's that helpful.
So this should just be the ministry podcast.
It will become that. I mean, but like
I'm with you on this idea, by the way.
Because it's not like we don't, it's not the coffee shop ministry podcast. It's not, it's like, well, if we're just going to do, you should at the coffee shop, at work, at whatever. I mean, you should be doing it everywhere that you are. This shouldn't be a different place, but we're also at a time where we need to differentiate that. So that's okay.
Well, so here, I'll give you the way I've talked about this. Online, offline. There's no distinction between online and offline. People are aligned in relationship.
Very nice. So the aligned ministry.
There you go. Well, okay. So that's number 1.
Yeah.
So what else do you tell people?
And then when we're talking right now, a lot of what we're doing, and because Young Life is just starting to enter into this in a really local way. And definitely since COVID, there's been some awesome college ministry that's been happening, especially in the Southwest, that I'm leaning heavily on, because they've done a lot of different things. But it's knowing your audience well enough to know that kind of that relationship, entertainment, information piece. Just found that has been a really helpful framework, not just for the staff person in an area who is sort of moving into this. But a lot of times it's like, I need to then convince our board and and other people that this is a good thing. And it's like, you just have to understand how Gen Z, Gen Alpha coming up are interacting with and seeing what this is. because it's not in the same way that you or I maybe or our generation, has been. And so like that is a pretty key piece to it. And then I think too, the thing that we're moving into, and Young Life College is doing really well, and we're trying to figure out how this is going to go with high schoolers, and then middle schoolers. Again, it's kind of a different animal, but for us, and I think what would be helpful here is if I follow, say you're a high school kid, and I follow you because I know your friend, and I'm not just going to like blindly go through the yearbook, and follow every high school kid. Although that's not a horrible idea, to try. But if you follow me back, I can either take that as great, whatever, that's cool. Now you'll get to see my stuff, or I can take that as I took a step towards you, and now you took a step toward me, and now it's my turn, and I can either continue this like kind of passive relationship that we've had, where you're just seeing Young Life Tonight, whatever, or I can direct message you. Hey, Nick, it's Adam. Not, hey, Nick, it's Bozeman Young Life. Hey, Nick, it's Adam.
Right.
Well, so like, thanks for the follow. I'm really glad. Like, I know your friend, John, I'd love to go grab coffee with you. I'd love for you to come to our thing on Monday night. I don't know if you've watched any of that stuff. The success that Young Life College has had doing that is, it's been wild.
Like what? Quantify it for me.
Like hundreds of new students at a university. Now, there's some different demographics and different, like every kid has access to social media now because they're over 18 and there's parents. I mean, there's some different things there, but in a university where maybe before we tabled, so we would have a table out at like the freshman orientation thing.
Right, okay.
And we've got Young Life and, on our little sign, which Young Life maybe has some advantage because we've got some brand awareness or whatever. But we might get whatever 50 or 60 kids' names, and we could text them or call them or whatever, and invite them into something. All of a sudden, we can. It's easy to just get on like a freshman, whatever Montana State University freshman Instagram page, and you can just click through and go follow. if you wanted to,
Sure.
you could do that, and then who's ever following back, all of a sudden you're in conversation. And so if you've got the time and the capacity to do that, which there's some Young Life colleges that do have that capacity and that time, they've got some like staff, and they know now where, and again, this is just sort of anecdotally, but I was talking to, she was down at, whatever university is down in San Diego, and they were bringing some kids to their fall retreat, some college students to their fall retreat. And she was she posted the picture of, the 80 or so students that went to their college weekend retreat in the fall. And she said, I know that probably 70 of those kids, our first interaction with them was not at a table, was not a phone call, wasn't parents going, you should check this out. It was on Instagram. And it was them following us and us going back and going, hey, so thanks for the follow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'd love for, I'd love when you come in for you to have a familiar face for whatever. So
it's amazing.
So easy. And the downside is like, they don't say anything back. And it can be a relatively canned response, that first one, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's, a meaningful canned response, but then all of a sudden you're having this back and forth in a way, in a context that said freshman or sophomore in college doesn't feel weird about that kind of communication or anything. And if they did, they won't respond back.
Right. It's
an easy opt out for them.
Right.
And there's no loss for us because it took, 9 seconds to send something.
Just don't be weird.
Right. But then the benefit is high. Well, yeah, don't be weird. Be normal and relational. Don't like go hard. Don't like go, your response shouldn't be thanks for the follow. Do you know where you're going to go when you die? Like that wouldn't be, I mean, that's just my theology, but like that to me would be a poor use of a first interaction.
Yeah. It's like in sales, it's like, hi, my name's Nick. Would you like to get married?
Yes.
No. Let's slow this down a little bit.
Right. Totally.
So
yeah. like you're selling wedding rings, and and it's like, it's got to be a long process. Get a date first, and
I
totally.
hate the sales analogies actually, because we're not selling anything.
But
it's building relationship.
Yeah, well, it feels gross, but there are some similar, like, back and, I mean, you can do that, but it is just be normal, be normally relational.
Yeah,
like you would want to be, and so, and I think that's probably a general overall rule of this is like,
I think what you're tapping into is like, people really want to be, I think people want to be known. I think they want to be invited.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think people do want to belong, but they want to be invited.
Yeah.
And,
and that's a continuum.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you want to be known, and so then you put yourself in places where maybe you can be, and in a digital space, it's a crowded room, right? And so then somebody invites you into something.
Yeah.
We want that to at least be an option, like I want your Monday night potentially to be full with relationships with us.
Right.
And then you can get belonging and meaning and significance and all these things that we all have, these God-given things that we desire. And, everybody probably listening to this, and you and I, know what that answer is. And so, if we can offer that in a way, we can all of a sudden have access in an audience that is probably pretty different than our own, that we already have. And I mean, there is a community building piece to it also, but that will come with all of this stuff. Like, it just as a byproduct, you do need to think about it. But I don't see why, like your kids seeing, or even my daughter seeing themselves in a video, like, that's awesome. Even though neither of them will, because they don't have Instagram, but
I see it and then I show it to them.
So do I. And
bad filter.
Right. But I belong to that, like, this is mine. I have ownership in this. And that is a radical difference from, this is something I go to.
You've got a relationship with my kids, through Young Life and church and stuff. You were heavily leveraged in that Snapchat conversation.
What? I don't even have Snapchat. That's not true. I do, but how was I leveraged in it? What did you say?
Maybe it was Jared.
Maybe.
Yeah. Hey, even my church stuff, it all comes through Snapchat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Logan, that was Logan's fault. That journey. He probably leverages.
That's probably.
I'm not going to get your kids into Snapchat, but I am told that often. Like Dan's, a mutual friend of ours, has a senior in high school, and she leveraged Young Life to get Instagram.
Yeah,
like they want me to be a part of, like, helping post.
Yeah. As
if we were like, you need to go home and tell your dad that you need to have this.
That's funny.
And then he caves. He's like, oh, well, okay. You're like, oh, damn,
no. I won the argument for a while just by telling my kids, I know all about Snapchat. It's a sexting app.
Yeah.
And that kind of shut it down until they were tired of hearing it.
Totally. Because everything can be that, I suppose.
Everything. Yeah.
Like texting can be that.
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, in whatever, you just got to be, I don't know, be thoughtful about all that stuff, and I think keep the conversation alive. And I think that's because I talk to plenty of parents that are like, what do you do with that kind of thing? And you're like, well, you want the conversation to keep going. So, as your kids get older, you can privy them to some of the actual reasons why you don't want them to have it.
Right.
Because some of them are really dangerous. Yeah. And there's, in the same way of like, well, I don't want you to go, like, just to, take that shortcut through that back alley. Right. And when they're 10, you go, because it's dangerous. Right. When they're 16, you start to go, here's the real things that can actually happen.
Right.
And most of our kids are way more ready for some of those conversations than we think that they are. So even like we had our daughter watch The Social Dilemma, which was a Netflix, like, kind of documentary type thing.
Oh yeah.
And because it was like, she's like, why can't I have some of this? And we said, well, here, this actually explains it pretty well.
Yeah.
And this is some of the stuff that we're thinking about in this conversation with you. It's not just, I'm old and I'm going to just put my foot down. And I might be old and my foot is down, but We're actually making hopefully rational decisions that are meaningful, because I know that this is a big deal and I know you're missing out on things. And I wouldn't intentionally just want to just pull you away from those if there wasn't an actual reason for that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Great stuff, Adam. Keep it up.
Thanks.
I love it.
Thanks for having me.
I like the framework to relationship, entertainment, information. I think that's really helpful for anybody that's trying to reach kids. But also, I think that I have a friend that says the world revolves around 14-year-old girls. Mm-hmm. And I think we've talked about this theory before. Like, the boys want to be near the girl. The moms want to relate to the daughter.
Yep.
The dads, I mean, as a dad of a daughter, I'm like, just don't go away.
No,
like,
totally.
Please stay with me. So like,
yep.
I'm curious about how that relationship, entertainment, information framework might start to shift up a little bit.
Well, it will, because we're all getting older, and they're not going to change their relationship with social media like that. I think that will continue on and go. And I think, the big worry in American Christianity right now, and in European Christianity, like kind of the Western world, is we're losing, market share, so to speak, in the world. Like, we're losing moral authority in things, the things that we used to just have, and people used to just come to church. And, but as generations, we're a generation, and sometimes even two, depending on where you are, away from the church having really any say in the life of a family. And we can either be really frustrated with that and get really insulated and just complain about how that's horrible, or we can use that as this pretty sweet opportunity to like move into the lives of people and be the first ones to, like, I say this a lot, but like, be the first ones to share the prodigal son story with somebody. And, things that we just have heard a million times, and all of a sudden they're going, man, I don't believe that God exists, but if he does, there's no way that he's like that. Like you're saying,
which is a relational statement.
Yes. Yep.
It's not an informational problem.
Yep. No question. And
I've talked to a lot of people that have rejected church, and it's all about the people with whom they had relationships.
Of course, and it's not the majority of us, but it's the loudest of us, that are, doing a poor job. And in some ways, like, Jesus isn't going away, and the desires in people's hearts for what Jesus offers isn't going away, but we are getting a little further apart from people even knowing that could be a possibility or a fix or whatever is a relationship with Christ. Because if that's not even an option, like, of course, we're going to see all this other stuff start to happen more and more and more, and because they don't even know that God is an option,
right,
to be able to fill those holes. So
great stuff.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming to the studio.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's go ski sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.